my name is Megan and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how your linoleum floors can go from that to this. So I apologize for the echo. It is always an issue in my house, but it is even worse in this room in particular. So I'm trying to talk kind of low so that it's not terrible. And the lighting's not great today because it is raining its butt off outside. So I'm just kind of making do today. I definitely want to get this room decorated, but I wanted to film this video before I did that so that there weren't too many distractions in the background. So a couple things about this project. First, you're going to need a linoleum floor. And if you don't have one of those, then I don't know why you're watching this video. The background color on this floor is actually a primer. It is the Stencil Bullseye 123 primer. I got it in the color white and it was perfect for this. It has a varnish in it, so it actually dries pretty fast. It's about an hour before you can recoat it. It was the exact color I wanted for the background of this floor, so that worked out for me. I didn't have to paint this with a primer and then go back over it with another color. The color of the design that I use inside of the stencil is actually Annie Sloan chalk paint. I got a 4-ounce tester size in this in the color graphite, which is actually, it might look black or maybe navy blue in the video, but it's actually like a very, very dark gray, like charcoal color graphite. The stencil that I used for the floor is from Michael's. It was like 10 bucks. So this was overall a pretty inexpensive project with the primer, chalk paint, stencil, and I also polyed it at the end. The poly included, it was about 50 bucks, I would say, all in all. I used a couple other supplies that I already had, but it was a pretty inexpensive project. And that is surprising for me because most of the time when I think something is going to be budget friendly, I start doing it and before I know it, I have spent hundreds of dollars on something that was supposed to be Pinteresty and like 20 bucks. One thing I love about this floor, and I will say it turned out differently than I originally planned. I had ordered a stencil off of Etsy that was actually too small for the squares in here. So I went ahead and went to Michael's and I found the stencil that I used, but it was completely different than what I was going for. And I love it now that it's done because it reminds me so much of the floor in a little hotel in Amalfi in Italy, where I spent a couple days with my husband before we were married, I don't know, like a year and a half, 2 years ago now. So coming home and getting out of my car and see this being like one of the first things I see in my house, I just love it because it immediately takes me back to being there with him, and it's just beautiful. If you notice, it's not perfect, and you'll see in this video how I stenciled it. I kind of changed my route a couple times as far as how I was taping the stencil and the viscosity of the paint. I ended up adding a little bit of water, and then I found at one point that I added too much water. So it is kind of like you have to find that perfect mix, but it's not perfect, and that's what I think I love about it. When you see real tile in Italy, you know, not every single one of them is perfect. Some of them are more faded, some of them change, some of them are different. So that is what I love even more about this. And that's hard for me to do because I want things to be perfect. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. And so the first like 4 or 5 squares that I did, I completely like washed off and redid them because they weren't perfect. And then I just had to kind of let it go and just move with it. Otherwise I would have been here all day, and I'm trying to learn to love imperfection, and it's working because I love this floor. So here's what you're going to need for this project: a hand sander, sandpaper at 80 grit, some Stencil Bullseye 123 primer. It's made for all surfaces and you can find it at Home Depot or Lowe's, a paintbrush, regular paint roller, foam roller, and a tray. Annie Sloan's chalk paint. I used a 4-ounce sample size, but if you have a larger space, you're going to need a larger amount of paint. A stencil, I found mine at Michael's for 10 bucks. And lastly, polyacrylic protective finish in crystal clear. Before you start, make sure you clear your room of any furniture or anything that is on the floor because that is where you're working. So this is the floor that we're going to paint. That's Darla. the texture here, if you can see, it's got some kind of like fakeish grout. So each square is kind of raised a little bit. So we'll still see that. And I got a stencil the size of these squares. So that's not something I have to worry about too much. But I am going to sand this first to kind of even out the texture. Make sure when you're doing this that you wear something over your face, because inhaling sanded linoleum is probably not recommended. So I just went through with my 80 grit sandpaper and I just sanded the entire floor. I got rid of all of the shine off of the top layer. I didn't really try to even anything out. There's no evening out this particular linoleum because there's so much texture. It's supposed to look like stone or tile or something, I don't know. So I just wanted to get that gloss off. After I'm done sanding, I'm gonna make sure that I clean the floors pretty well. I went ahead and swept everything up into a pile, vacuumed that up, and then I took the opportunity to go along and vacuum the baseboards, pretty much anywhere that I thought some dust or debris could be there, because I didn't want anything falling into my paint. I went ahead and cleaned the floor with Crud Cutter. It is a cleaner and degreaser. If I didn't use that, I probably would have used Windex, something along those lines. And now I'm all set, ready to go to paint. So I went ahead and just started rolling it out, and I'm somebody who kind of likes to cut and roll at the same time if I can. So that's exactly what I did. I went ahead and rolled out, a couple square feet, and then I would go through and I would cut in that same area along the wall. And because my baseboards are it's just that this room was like not really used, or it was used poorly, so there was a lot of scuff marks and things I couldn't really get off just by cleaning them. So luckily this paint matched almost exactly to my baseboard, so I went ahead and I touched those spots up too. But if you have baseboards that are wood or another color, or the white is not exactly doesn't match, or you're painting the floor a different color, then you're going to want to make sure you tape your baseboards off. All in all, I ended up with 3 coats of the floor primer, and I also had to go back and cut all 3 times that I went through and rolled this paint out. Once your floor is completely dry, you can start stenciling. You want to make sure you put your stencil on the very center of your square. Tape it down with some painter's tape so it doesn't move when you start to roll your paint out. Recommend pouring your paint into a tray, and I add a little bit of water to my chalk paint because I like the consistency when it's just a little thinner. So you want to make sure that you get all of the excess paint off of your stencil, and that when you roll it out you don't press too hard, because if you do it will become splotchy like this. And luckily you can just take some water or some Windex and clean it up really quickly and start over again. It definitely comes out better when you use less paint and less pressure. At this point I just started rocking and rolling, and I didn't really even care if I didn't do it perfectly, because like I said at the beginning of the video, if it's not perfect, it's fine. Everything flows together, and the imperfections are what makes it perfect. If I had something that was a little too smudgy, I just used my Windex and I cleaned it off and I started over again. It was no big deal. If you have a place where you need to go to the edge, don't bother cutting your stencil. Instead, I just went ahead and I brushed all the way up against the wall, and if I got anything on the baseboard, I just went back and wiped it off. It wasn't a big deal. Chalk paint dries pretty fast, but I'd still give it about an hour before you start your final step, which is going to be rolling out your polyacrylic protective finish. You'll need your foam roller and a tray. I did 2 solid coats of the poly. I did not sand in between either one of them. I just rolled them out, let them dry for 2 hours apiece, and let it ride. I just want to thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and leave me a comment if you plan to do something like this in your own home.